David had lost everything: his home, his job, even his faith in himself. But there, in that crowded airport terminal, with only $100 in his pocket, he was about to make the most courageous decision of his life. Final call for Flight 447 to Denver. David's heart pounded as he raced through the terminal. This was his last chance. A job interview on the other side of the country. A humiliating position, but one that would cover the rent. His boarding pass trembled in his sweaty hand. 2 minutes, just 2 minutes before the gate would close forever. That's when he saw her. Sophia White, 28 years old, daughter of billionaire Victor White, the same man who had destroyed David's life, stolen his company, left him with nothing. She sat alone in her wheelchair, lost, vulnerable, completely unaware that the man her father had crushed was standing just 10 feet away. 10 seconds to decide. The gate was closing. His new life was right there waiting. But something about her loneliness, her fragility, froze him in place. Gate closing, final boarding call. David looked at the departure gate, then at Sophia. The gate, then back at her. He made his choice. David let his flight leave without him. He gave up his one shot at starting over for a question so important, so dangerous, it would cost him everything he had left. But what he discovered next would shock everyone. 3 months earlier, David Richardson was the owner of a small but promising tech company in Silicon Valley. He had developed a revolutionary safety system for self-driving cars, an algorithm capable of preventing accidents even before traditional sensors could detect them. It was his masterpiece, the result of 6 years of relentless work and personal sacrifice. The technology was so advanced that it had caught the attention of the country's top investors. Among them was Victor White, the ruthless billionaire who controlled an empire of automotive tech companies. Victor had approached David with golden promises: a $50 million investment, global expansion, the chance to save millions of lives. David still remembered that fateful day. He was in the office of White Industries, a glass skyscraper that touched the clouds of San Francisco. Victor, a 58-year-old man with eyes as cold as steel, had shaken his hand with a smile that never reached his eyes. "David, my boy," Victor had said, his voice echoing through the luxurious office, "your technology is exactly what the world needs. We're going to make history together." The deal was nearly sealed. David had handed over all the source codes, all the prototypes, all the research. It was standard protocol, Victor had assured him, just for the lawyers to review the technical aspects before the final signing. But then, on the eve of the signing, everything collapsed. David could still taste the bitterness of betrayal when he remembered the call. Victor, cold and calculating, had canceled the deal without explanation. Worse, 2 weeks later, White Industries announced the launch of a revolutionary safety system that was almost identical to David's. The lawsuit that followed was brutal. Victor White had unlimited resources, an army of high-priced lawyers, and connections in all the right places. David, with his meager means, was crushed in court. Not only did he lose the case, he was forced to pay White's legal fees, an amount that drove him into complete bankruptcy. Within weeks, David lost everything. His company shut down, his house was foreclosed, his employees were laid off, and Sarah, his wife of 5 years, couldn't take the pressure. "I can't do this anymore, David. You've become a shadow of who you were. That man, that White, he didn't just steal your company, he stole you from me." David tried to argue, begged her, promised he'd find a way, but Sarah had already made her mind. "I love you, David, but I can't drown with you. Maybe when you find yourself again." And then she was gone.
taking with her the last remnants of the life David once knew. The months that followed were a nightmare of despair. David moved into a tiny apartment in a dangerous neighborhood, the only place he could afford with what little was left after the lawyers took their share. He tried to find work, but Victor White's reputation haunted him. No one wanted to hire the man who had tried to sue one of the most powerful billionaires in America. David began taking odd jobs: food delivery, night janitor, anything that paid. But even then, he could barely survive. There were nights when dinner was nothing more than stale bread and tap water. Mornings when he woke up on the cold floor because the electricity had been shut off. The worst part was the loneliness. His friends had disappeared one by one, unable to handle his fall or afraid of being associated with him. His calls went unanswered, his emails ignored. David became a ghost in his own life. That's when the opportunity in Denver appeared. A small software company was looking for a junior developer, a position far beneath his qualifications, but it offered a modest salary and a chance to start over, far from San Francisco, far from the memories, far from Victor White's shadow. David scraped together his last savings, exactly $147, and bought a one-way ticket to Denver. It was his final move, his only shot at rebuilding some resemblance of a normal life. That morning at the airport, standing in line at the check-in counter with his worn-out backpack containing all his possessions, David felt a strange mix of hope and desperation. Hope that maybe finally he could leave the past behind. Desperation because deep down he knew he was running, not facing it. But fate had other plans. As he ran through the terminal, his mind focused on only one thing: don't miss this flight. He couldn't afford to. He had $100 in his pocket, just enough for a few days in Denver until his first paycheck. But if he missed this flight, there was no plan B. There was nothing. That's why seeing Sophia White hit him like a bolt of lightning. She was sitting alone near the international boarding area, her wheelchair facing the giant windows overlooking the runways. She wore sunglasses that were too big for her delicate face, and her pale hands rested motionless in her lap. There was something profoundly melancholy in her posture, her shoulders slightly hunched, her head tilted, as if carrying an invisible weight.
David recognized her immediately from the photos he had seen during his research on Victor White. Sophia was the billionaire's only daughter, rarely seen in public since a terrible car accident 3 years earlier that had left her blind and partially paralyzed. But seeing her there, so fragile and alone, stripped her of all the aura of wealth and privilege. She didn't look like the daughter of one of the most powerful men in America. She just looked like a lost, lonely young woman. It was in that moment that David noticed something that made him stop mid-stride. She was alone. No assistant, no bodyguard, no aid. For a woman in her condition, the daughter of a billionaire, to be completely alone in an airport was strange. More than strange, it was suspicious. "Final call for Flight 447. The voice over the loudspeaker snapped him back to reality. His flight, his life, his only chance. David looked at the boarding gate, then at Sophia, then back to the gate. The airline employee was literally closing the door. Other late passengers were sprinting, waving their arms, begging to be let on. But David couldn't move. There was something about Sophia's loneliness that mirrored his own, something about her vulnerability that struck a deep chord in his wounded heart. And there was something else, a question that had haunted him for months, ever since he discovered the connection between Sophia's accident and his stolen technology. During his obsessive research on Victor White, David had come across disturbing details about Sophia's crash. Officially, it had been a mechanical failure, a brake malfunction in a prototype she was testing. But the dates didn't line up. The crash had happened exactly 3 days after Victor had stolen David's code. What if
What if it wasn't a coincidence? That question had consumed David for months. He had tried to access accident reports, but they were all sealed. He had reached out to investigators, but no one wanted to get involved in anything tied to Victor White. But now, here was Sophia, the only person who might know the truth about what really happened that day. David felt his legs move before his mind made the conscious decision. He turned away from the boarding gate and walked slowly toward Sophia. Behind him, he heard the final, unmistakable sound of the airplane door sealing shut. His last chance was gone. But for the first time in months, David felt like he was doing the right thing. He approached Sophia carefully, like she was a wounded animal that might flee at any moment. When he was just a few feet away, he stopped and watched. Up close, she looked even more delicate. Her skin was pale like porcelain, and there was a deep sadness in the faint lines around her eyes, even hidden behind the dark sunglasses. Her clothes were clearly expensive, a simple yet elegant silk dress, Italian leather shoes, but there was no flash, no excess. It almost looked like she was trying to disappear. David took a deep breath. He had given up his only shot at a new beginning for this moment. The question he was about to ask could change everything, or destroy whatever hope he had left. But some truths, he realized, were worth more than a lifetime of running.
He took a step forward. "Excuse me," he said softly. "May I talk to you?" Sophia slowly lifted her head, as if emerging from a deep dream. For a moment, she seemed disoriented, her hands lightly twitching on the arms of her wheelchair. She began, her voice soft but hesitant. "Sorry? Were you talking to me?" David immediately noticed something in the way she spoke. There was an almost musical quality to her voice, but also a guardedness, as if she wasn't used to casual conversations with strangers. "Yes, sorry to bother you," David said, taking a step closer. "Can I ask?" David hesitated, feeling the weight of the question that had cost him his flight. "Are you here alone? I mean, is someone coming to pick you up?" "That's an interesting question," Sophia laughed. But it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that carries years of disillusionment. "Technically, I'm not alone. My driver is somewhere, probably smoking in the parking lot. My personal assistant is checking my schedule, and I'm sure there are at least 2 bodyguards watching me from a distance." She paused, her fingers tapping nervously on the armrest. "But to answer your real question, yes, I'm completely alone." The raw honesty in her voice hit David like a punch to the gut. He recognized that tone. It was the same one he heard in his own voice when he spoke about his loneliness. "I understand," he said softly. "Sometimes being surrounded by people makes the loneliness even worse." Sophia turned her face fully toward him now, her sunglasses reflecting the airport's fluorescent lights. "You really do understand, don't you?" she said, and there was a note of surprise in her voice. "Most people say they do, but there's something different in your voice. You know this kind of loneliness." David felt a lump rise in his throat. How did she read so much from his voice? How could she see through him, even though she was blind? "Listen," Sophia continued, leaning forward slightly. "I know this might sound strange, but you just lost something important, didn't you?" David's heart skipped a beat. "How did you—" "I'm blind, not deaf," she said with a small smile. "I heard you running through the terminal. I heard the desperation in your steps. I heard the final boarding call for Flight 447 to Denver. And then you stopped. You chose not to board. David was speechless. She had noticed everything. Why? Sophia asked, her voice now filled with genuine curiosity. Why did you miss your flight just to talk to a stranger? It was the question David had been trying to avoid. How could he explain without revealing who he was? How could he tell her that he had sacrificed his last chance to start over because he needed to ask a question about the accident that had changed her life forever? David began, then stopped. The truth was too complicated, too dangerous. But maybe a smaller truth would be enough. You reminded me of someone I lost. Your wife? Sophia asked gently. David felt as if she had looked straight into his soul. How did you... There's a specific kind of sadness in a man's voice when he talks about a woman he loved and lost. It's different from any other sadness. It's more hollow. They sat in silence for a moment, two strangers sharing a pain they couldn't fully name. David sat down, noticing how she immediately turned slightly toward him, as if tuning in to a radio frequency. You know what's funny? Sophia said after a moment. My father always tells me that poor people only approach me out of interest, that they want something, money, connections, and opportunity. David felt the blood drain from his veins. If he knew who he really was. But you, she continued, you just gave up something important. That flight to Denver, maybe a job, maybe a new start, just to check if a stranger was okay. That doesn't make sense in my father's worldview. Maybe, David said carefully, your father doesn't understand that some people do good things simply because they're right, not because they expect something in return. Sophia laughed, and this time there was a hint of genuine joy in the sound. You know what's even stranger? My father is one of the richest men in the world, but I feel like the poorest person alive. I have everything money can buy, but I have none of the things that really matter.
David felt a tightness in his chest at the cruel irony of the situation. There she was, the daughter of the man who had destroyed his life, speaking about emotional poverty, while he, literally poor and homeless, had just sacrificed his only shot at financial stability for a conversation with her. "What do you mean?" he asked. Sophia hesitated, as if deciding how much she could trust this kind stranger. "Since my accident," she finally said, "I've lived like a prisoner in my own home. My father, he says it's for my protection, but sometimes I wonder if it's more about control. He decides where I go, when I go, who I talk to. Today is the first time in months I've been in a public place without him dictating my every move." "And how did you manage that freedom?" David asked, genuinely curious. "I lied," Sophia said, with a mischievous smile that made her look years younger. "I told him I had a medical appointment. The truth is, I just wanted to feel normal for a few hours, to sit somewhere where people don't know me, or I'm not the tragic billionaire's daughter." David felt a wave of guilt. She was seeking normalcy, and he was about to shatter it with questions about the most painful part of her past. "That must be hard, not having control over your own life. The worst part," Sophia said, her voice growing softer, "is that sometimes I suspect my father that he likes having me dependent on him, as if my tragedy somehow serves his purposes." David's heart began to race. She was getting dangerously close to the territory he needed to explore. "What do you mean?" Sophia went quiet for a long moment, her fingers nervously playing with the fabric of her dress. "My accident," she finally said, "happened while I was testing a new safety system for cars, a prototype my father's company was developing." David felt as though the world had stopped spinning. "Officially, it was a mechanical failure," Sophia continued, her voice tightening. But I've always wondered, the circumstances were just so convenient for him. I had started asking questions about some of his business practices, questioning some of his more questionable choices. What kind of choices? Intellectual property theft, mostly, Sophia said, and David nearly fell out of his chair. She knew. Somehow she knew about her father's crimes. Did you confront your father about it? He asked. I tried, Sophia said bitterly. The week before my accident, I had found evidence of at least 3 clear cases of stolen intellectual property. I was planning to take it to a lawyer. And then the accident happened. And then the accident happened, she repeated. And suddenly, I wasn't a threat to my father's business anymore. I was just his tragic, dependent daughter. David felt a volatile mix of rage and vindication. His suspicion had been right. Sophia's accident had not been a coincidence. Sophia, can I ask you a question that might sound strange? A question that cost me a flight and maybe my only chance to start over? She turned fully toward him, her sunglasses reflecting his distorted image. You missed your flight for a question for me? She said, and there was something like admiration in her voice. No one's ever sacrificed anything for me before, let alone a stranger. David took a deep breath. This was the question that had changed the course of his life, the question that might finally reveal the truth they both needed to hear. On the day of your accident, he said slowly, do you remember any specific detail about the system you were testing? Something about how it worked or where the technology originally came from?
Sophia's face visibly paled, even behind her dark sunglasses. How do you... she began, her voice barely above a whisper. How do you know about the system? Who are you? And why was that question worth missing your flight? David realized he had reached the point of no return. Whatever he said next would change everything, for both of them. He looked at this fragile, courageous woman who had suffered so much at the hands of the same man who had destroyed his own life. She deserved the truth. She deserved to know she wasn't alone in her suspicions. She deserved to know that the technology that had stolen her sight and mobility had been created by the man sitting beside her. Because I was the one who developed the safety system in that car. The car that was supposed to prevent the crash. The car that left you like this. Sophia froze. Her expression, once serene, hardened. She remained silent for several seconds, digesting his words like stones. Who are you? David looked her in the eyes. There was no reason to hide anymore. My name is David Richardson. I was the founder of Richardson Tech, the autonomous intelligence startup that created that system. Your father was our investor. He pulled out days before the official launch. 2 days later, my company was destroyed. My bank account frozen, due to a clause he himself inserted. My patent? Sold. To him. And then I heard about your accident, and everything made sense. Sophia said nothing, but a tear slid slowly down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She let it fall, as if it carried years of repression, pain, and suspicion. So, it's true. I didn't just lose my sight that day. I lost everything. My freedom, my autonomy, even my voice. She turned her face toward him. I remember, vaguely, I was inside the car, alone. We were testing the new software. My father said it was just a prototype that no one else could know. He said I would be the example, that it would be my legacy. I trusted him. She took a breath with effort. But when the car failed and crashed, when I woke up in the hospital, he already had a story ready, and I only had one choice. Accept it
or be treated like I was crazy. David's heart tightened, not just from the injustice, but because he saw in front of him not just the daughter of a billionaire, but a broken woman, trapped in a gilded cage, and somehow she was as much a victim as he was. He tested the technology on you to cover up the theft. And when it went wrong, he used your silence as a shield. Sophia nodded slowly. After the accident, he became even more controlling, said I could no longer go out alone, that I needed constant care. He installed sensors in every room, restricted my access, even my bank account came under his control. He said it was for my own good, that the world out there was too cruel for someone fragile like me. And you believed him? For a while, until I started listening, overhearing conversations, phone calls, confessions, and then I understood. I was more useful to him, blind, limited, isolated, obedient. The perfect daughter, the silent heiress. David felt his stomach churn. That's why I'm here, because my life was destroyed by someone who never paid for anything. But I needed to be sure. I needed to hear it from you. And now I know I'm not the only one he betrayed. Sophia ran her hands over her face, as if trying to peel off an invisible mask. Her breathing was quick, but something new had taken root in her expression. Determination. I kept everything, David. Codes, reports, recorded conversations he didn't know about. I was waiting for the right moment, but I never knew if I'd have the courage to act alone. Now, maybe I don't have to be alone anymore. David leaned forward slightly. Do you have any idea what that means? It means that maybe we both lost everything for a greater reason. Two strangers bound by an invisible thread of pain and injustice, but now also by courage and purpose. Sophia, David said, his voice softer, you're not fragile. You're the strongest person I've ever met. She smiled. For the first time, a genuine smile. And you? You gave up everything for me. For one question. Why? Because sometimes the right questions are worth more than a lifetime of empty answers. In that moment, something shifted, not just between them, but within them. And what began with a missed flight was about to become the truth that would bring down an empire.
The airport had faded into the background. For David and Sophia, everything now revolved around what to do with the truth. A truth buried for years, smothered beneath billion-dollar contracts, well-rehearsed lies, and forced silence. But on that cold bench, surrounded by forgotten suitcases and flight announcements that no longer mattered, a plan was beginning to take shape. Sophia, despite her calm voice, had restless hands. Her fingers moved as if typing invisible code, as if her mind was already tracing possibilities, accessing hidden memories. You said you developed the system, she asked, staring at a fixed point in space. Do you still have the code? David said yes, feeling the weight of every memory. It's on a physical hard drive. I didn't trust putting it online. After I lost everything, it was all I had left. It's stored with the same clothes I was wearing the day I got evicted. I haven't had the courage to open it since. Sophia took a deep breath. Her tone now had changed. There was something pragmatic, technical, direct about it. You know that if we can prove sabotage, and if I...
If I expose what he did to me, this could bring down the entire White Empire. I know. But the real question is, are you ready for that? She hesitated. For the first time since they began talking, she seemed truly afraid. I've always been the perfect daughter, the heir who accepted everything without question. But I'm tired of pretending I'm weak, and you reminded me that I can still fight. In the days that followed, they disappeared off the radar, evading her father's security and staff. While the media speculated about the billionaire heiress's whereabouts, Sophia and David were holed up in a remote house, surrounded by computers, old notes, forgotten files, and truths. She revealed she had copies of internal reports, encrypted emails, the very recording of the crash, hidden on a personal server Victor believed had been erased. He was always obsessed with control. That's why he recorded everything, even family meetings. He called it legal prevention. David opened the old hard drive. It was all there. The original code, clean, stable, safe, no flaws. And right beside it, the altered lines with the malicious insert. The digital signature of the one who had inserted it was unmistakable. The lead engineer hired by Victor 2 weeks before the crash. "It's all here," David said, voice choked. "He destroyed my life to launch the technology as if it were his own, and used me as the test subject. If something went wrong, I'd just be another victim of a technical failure, an internal flaw. Nothing would ever trace back to him." With each passing day, Sophia felt that something deeper was growing between them. Trust, affection, and maybe even love. One evening, during a conversation on the porch, Sophia, gazing at the sky, her fingers intertwined with David's, decided to reveal her final truth. "David," she said gently, "I need to tell you something about my blindness." He turned to her, surprised but fully attentive. "When the crash happened, I really did lose my sight. It was immediate, total darkness. They told me it was permanent, but after a few months, shadows started to return. First shapes, then lights, and little by little, I began to see again. But I didn't tell anyone, not even my father." He frowned, puzzled. "Why?" She took a deep breath, eyes on the trees swaying in the wind. "Because I was already suspicious of him, of everything. The secret meetings, the hidden documents, the way he talked about the accident. Pretending to be blind gave me what he never did: freedom, privacy, the chance to observe without being observed. That's how I discovered truths, including about you." David stayed silent, absorbing every word. "When I saw you, David, for the first time, I already knew who you were, knew what you had done, and what you hadn't done. But I needed to hear it from your lips, and seeing you there in front of me, owning your guilt, crying with the truth, it showed me you were nothing like him." She squeezed his hand. "I may not walk, David, but I am free. And with you, I see the world as it really is. No lies, no masks, just truth and love."
He just rested his forehead against hers and closed his eyes. In silence, they both felt the weight of the past finally dissolve. Between them, only the present remained, and a future that, for the first time, felt light. "If he finds out we're in this together," David began. "He'll react, fast," Sophia finished. "That's why we need to act first." But it was already too late. The next morning, a black limousine pulled up in front of the house where they were hiding. Victor White,
had arrived. Sophia stayed calm, but David noticed the slight tremble in her hands. He stepped closer. "You're not alone. Not anymore." Victor entered like a man who still believed he was untouchable. He wore a tailored suit, a cold stare, and the smug smile of someone who had built empires without ever hearing the word no. "Sophia, what a disappointment," he said, glancing around with disdain. "And you, David, the man who fell like a dog and now barks at the dates of my empire." "Unlike you, I fell on my feet," David replied, meeting his gaze. Victor turned to his daughter. "You really think this failure can save you? You're my daughter. You have my blood. You owe me loyalty." "Loyalty?" Sophia laughed, dry and bitter. "Loyalty requires truth, and you gave me lies. You gave me a blind life. Literally, you used me as a shield, as a bait, and as an excuse." Victor stepped closer, his voice lower now, almost threatening. "Careful, Sophia. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who," she replied, pulling a small device from her pocket. "And I've recorded every word you've said over the last 3 years, including that meeting where you said, 'If she dies, the empire returns to my hands.'" Victor's expression finally changed. For the first time, fear. "You wouldn't." "Already did," Sophia replied. "It's already with my lawyer, and with the press. You can't silence the truth anymore, Dad. Not this time." David stepped forward, his face firm. "You destroyed my company, my life, and hers. But you forgot one thing. Hurt people can become dangerously strong." Victor took a step back. There was nothing more to say. He knew he had lost. Within 48 hours, news outlets around the world exploded. Headlines plastered Victor White's face next to the word he had always feared: criminal. Recordings, emails, testimonies. Sophia publicly admitted she had pretended to be blind for years, waiting for the right moment to act. "For 3 years, I listened to everything. Pretending I couldn't see was my only defense. But now, I see clearer than ever," she said, standing before a packed auditorium. David, beside her, gently held her hand. Justice came swiftly. Victor White was arrested. His assets were frozen. The company's board removed him. Sophia took control of the empire, but not to grow richer. She chose to redirect everything. She created a foundation focused on automotive safety, and its name was the same as the startup her father tried to destroy: Richardson Tech. "David," she said, days later, "I want you to lead the project, not as an employee, as a partner, as an equal. The technology you created, it saved my life, even sabotaged. Now, it can save thousands more." David hesitated. He looked at her, eyes glistening. "I don't want your money. I don't want pity." She smiled. "This isn't pity. It's justice and admiration. Maybe something more." David took a deep breath. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't been looking for it. But for the first time in years, he felt he could trust someone, that he could start over. "And what if this is only the beginning?" he asked. "Then let's write the rest together," she replied, extending her hand. And that's how the man who lost everything for a single question found not just the answer, but truth, justice, and something he never thought he'd find again: love. The love between them grew slowly, like morning light streaming through a long-forgotten window. And when it finally bloomed, it was a new beginning for both, a chance to build, not with code or machines, but with something far rarer in the world: truth and compassion. And if you've made it this far, it's because you too believe every story deserves a second chance. If this story moved you in any way, like it, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and follow the channel for more real, profound, and transformative stories. Because sometimes, all it takes is one question and one true answer to change everything.